We are so incredibly grateful to be joined by Lindsay Kaplan today. Really honored. Lindsay is the founder and lead consultant at The Gathering Effect, which is a consultancy that helps organizations influence at scale through strategy, design, and facilitation. Lindsay is so thoughtful in her approach to gathering and facilitation, and Workshop's just really honored to have her as a guest host today. And of course, we are joined by the amazingly talented Devin Owens. Devin is our communications manager here at Workshop. She preps, plans, does all the pre and post content for our all hands here at Workshop. So just really excited to listen and learn from the both of them today. So with that, I will go ahead and stop sharing here. And Lindsay, I will pass it off to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kelsey, and thank you to the workshop team. Let me share my screen and ask you the same question. Does that work for you all?
Yes, I think, let's see it. Do I see, is the bottom cut off for you, Devin? Oh, there we go. There we go.
Yep. Good?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Again, thank you so much to the workshop team for having me. And I'll give you a little bit more background about myself. My name is Lindsay Kaplan. As Kelsey said, I'm the founder of The Gathering Effect. And my background is a weird mix of three different things: communication, learning and development, and organizational psychology. And I've worked both internally inside companies and also as a consultant on all hands. And now my work with organizations is to design group moments that influence at scale and truly move people. And all hands are one of those moments. And as Kelsey said, in addition to myself, you will hear from Devin in a little bit. So now you know the who, and now we'll share the what. So we want you to walk away with a couple of different things. One, concrete tips or shifts on how to make your all hands more effective and more engaging. So what that means is not just checking a box, but create moments that really are impactful. And then by engaging, how to design these all hands in a way that makes people tune in instead of lean out. And the tips that I'll share today are both content agnostic and channel agnostic. So no matter what content you're sharing, or whether your all hands are virtual or in person or a hybrid, you can use these tips. So now that you know the who and the what, let's share the how. As Kelsey mentioned, here's how we're going to achieve those objectives. You can expect about 35-ish minutes of content. Please get all your questions in there and we'll answer as many as we can at the end. And then, excuse me, please chat away. I'm going to offer one way to do this, which is a strategy I learned from Adam Grant, who's an organizational psychologist and professor and best-selling author. And when his classroom at Wharton went virtual during the pandemic, he actually started using hashtags like aha or on fire or debate to get a sense of this virtual artifact of what the class was really learning and taking away. And we encourage you to do that here with us today. And what this really does, I want to explain the why behind my thinking, is it gives participants a role and tells them how to participate, right? And it helps this all hands or your events go beyond one-way communication. So you can use this too. So we talked about the who and the what and the how. And now let's just take a second on the why. I want to know why you're here. So what brought you here? If you can tell us maybe in a line or two in the chat, what are you hoping to learn? Why is this topic important to you? And we'll take just a couple of minutes to accumulate some answers here. So tell us what you're hoping to learn or why you showed up, why you're spending your morning, or maybe if you're across an ocean, your afternoon or evening with us. New fresh ideas, or town hall news fest. Okay, that's great. That's not great. That's great that you're here. Fresh and engaging, how to mix it up, more engaging. Awesome. This is great. Okay, fantastic. So we hope to give you a lot of those ideas. And before I do that, I just want to share my why I'm here with you all. So I really believe that all hands are opportunities to influence and not just to inform. And what I mean by that is we're not just coordinating a meeting, right? We're trying to move people, to align them or to reconnect them. But very often these all hands are really just a delivery mechanism where we're trying to push out updates or content. And I think there is a better way, because information does matter, but information alone doesn't move people. And I think, as what I'm seeing in the chat, that's why you're here today. And so we're not going to solve every question or every challenge, just want to set expectations, right? But I do want to give you some practical tools and tips that you can use, whether you are the one leading the meeting, creating it, or influencing those who are. With that, let's get into some tips. And this is really the first one, which we've already done. To start your all hands by clarifying the who, the what, the how, and the why. And I think this sounds really simple, but many all hands or gatherings for that matter really skip this step. And when we skip this step, I think we miss an opportunity to give people clarity and context and direction. And a little bit of structure, I think, really goes a long way. If we think about if you're a fan of Peloton like me, or Broadway playbills, or class syllabus or syllabi, these give us a sense of direction so we know where we're headed, and we can trust the driver because we know that we're in good hands. So it also reduces anxiety, increases certainty, all these kinds of things. So if we set the frame early, I think it's also really helpful because people are much more likely to stay with you as the all hand goes. That's the first tip. As I promised you, I'm going to give you 3 shifts to make your all hands more effective and more engaging. And this is the first one. If we want our all hands to be more effective, one of the key shifts that we can make is from the topics that we want to share to the effect that we want our all hands to have. And I'll explain what I mean by that. So basically what I'm suggesting is that we start with the effect, not the topic or the message. And this is really one of the most common traps that I see when I work with clients. We focus a lot on what the content is, but not so much on the so what. And what this means is maybe 2 things. All hands can become a catch-all or a panacea that's expected to do everything, to engage and inform and fix culture and inspire and align. And when it's meant to do all of these things, I'd argue that it ends up doing nothing particularly well. And so if we don't know what effect we're designing for, what outcome we want to create, how will we know if we've achieved it? So what I'm going to share with you is a few questions that you can ask to clarify your desired effect. And I'll give you just a couple seconds to read through these. You don't have to use all of them. You can use 1 or 2, or if you're a star student, all 5. But when we answer these questions, both for the all hands as a whole, but perhaps with each presenter, it gives us clarity, but it also gives us power because it becomes a bit of a strategic filter. So the next time someone says, hey, can I squeeze in this update, or can I add a few slides here? Clarifying our desired effect makes our no much more purposeful instead of personal, which I've been in that position many times of having to say no. And it can be very difficult. And so if we use the desired effect as really our North Star, it can be much easier. I worked with a client recently where the all hands was very packed and chaotic. The flow was inconsistent, no clear decision-making process. Stop me if this sounds familiar to you. But once we got alignment on the desired effect, which for them was to align everyone on the mission of the company and their progress towards it, the agenda became a lot more focused and the gathering felt a lot more cohesive. So I think this really does work. It takes a little bit of time, but I think has, pun intended, a really big effect. I'll show you how to practically do this as well in your agenda slides. So typical agenda slides tend to look like the one on the left, where we share the content, or we highlight the content that we're sharing. And really what this does, it's helpful, but it makes it easy for people to tune out when that section isn't really relevant to them. If I'm not in engineering, I might go get a snack if my all hands is virtual. But if we look at creating effect agendas instead, what it really does is it helps people understand the so what, why we're sharing it, and makes it much more explicit what employees will walk away with and why it matters to them. And I think this shift probably takes an extra couple minutes to create. This is not a big ask, but in my experience, this does a lot to move the needle in terms of clarity and retention. So I shared a tip on how to make your all hands more effective. And now let's talk a little bit about how to make them more engaging, really in the truest sense of the word. And by engaging, I don't really mean like a cool GIF or an emoji or a transition. What I mean by engaging is that people leave feeling more committed and more bought in a sense of ownership to the organization. And you might be thinking, is that really necessary? And my answer to you would be, when you consider how expensive these meetings are, I think the answer is yes. And actually, I have a calculator on my website where you can do some scary math and basically see how much your all hands cost. Buyer beware, it can be a scary number. But not only are these meetings expensive, but they require time and coordination and attention and leadership capital. And so if we're going to bring everyone together, we want to make sure it's not just filling time, but it's actually fueling something. So I'll walk through a couple of shifts to help you create that kind of engagement. So the first is the shift from what I call push to pull, meaning that we want to do our all hands with employees and not at them. And very often I feel that I see a lot of all hands that are really push style. And I can always tell it's push when I hear we have a lot of content to get through, we've got a lot of slides to share. That to me is a key signal that this is really just about pushing information out at people. But real engagement happens when we design for pull, which means that we invite people in, their co-creation, we make them more active instead of passive. And again, we move beyond one-way communication. So I'll share 2 ways to do that. The first is to give people a role. And let me explain. If anyone's gone wine tasting, which is a very fun activity, you're often handed a glass of wine. And when they give it to you, they say, you might taste notes of strawberry or more floral notes. And there's a reason why they're doing that. They're giving you something to react to right away. They're pulling you into the experience to get you to notice, pay attention, interpret, talk with them, and converse. And so you're no longer passively sipping. You have a role to play in the experience. And we can do the same thing in our all hands, obviously not with wine, unfortunately, but hopefully you get the idea. And there's a few ways to do this. One is to offer choice. So maybe give people a couple of prompts to pay attention to during your all hands. What's resonating with you, or what do you want to take back to your team? You can share something unfinished and solicit feedback. You can use a worksheet or reflection prompts for people to take notes in their own context. You can surface themes or takeaways, or you can co-create something visible, like with these hashtags that help you understand what people are responding to and taking back. And that,
Lindsay, I was just going to say in the chat, can we move your slides a little to, I think they're cutting off. Some of them are cutting off to the right. If we can just, there we go. I think that's going to get all of them. There we go.
Okay.
Perfect. Sorry to interrupt.
No, all good. So these small choices, I think, actually signal something pretty big, which is that we're not just here to listen. We want employees thinking. They're there because we want their thinking. And when people feel needed, they show up differently and much more likely to stay engaged. So we can give people a role as well. The second way to pull instead of push is to basically do what I call an issue to question switch, which basically means we want to ask more questions that invite participation and curiosity and creativity and ownership. And there's a few different ways to do that. One is to start your all hands with a question on the screen maybe related to that day's content that gets people thinking and putting that content in their own context. Or you can turn your entire agenda into questions that you're going to answer instead of topics. Or you can take a page from television and movies who use a device called a central question that the entire all hands is going to answer. So for fans of Severance or White Lotus or Love is Blind, really any television show, part of the reason why we tune in and stay tuned in is because we want to find out the answer to that central question. We want to know what the heck is Lumen Industries, or who dies on White Lotus, or is love truly blind? And I don't want you to ask such severe questions in your all hands, but it gives people an itch to scratch. So consider how you can switch from issues to questions. The last shift is to go from one size fits all to personalized. And what this really means is bringing in the content that you want to share closer to what your audience or what your employees already care about. I'm going to give you a couple of ways to do that. One way is to do after shows. And if anyone watches Bravo, I'm outing myself here. and watch what happens live. Basically, what Andy Cohen does as host is after like Real Housewives of Orange County or another Bravo show, he does smaller, shorter after shows with cast members or the fans of the show, and they get to debrief and talk about it and digest it and go deeper on what they just watched. And we can do the same thing in our organizations. What this does is it helps personalize the material in our own context, gets us talking and connecting and putting it in our own, in our own words. And research actually shows that we tend to speak up in groups where we feel safest. So if people aren't chatting or asking questions in your all company, all hands, chances are they'll probably feel more comfortable to do so in a smaller group, like maybe your recruiting team or your go-to-market team only. So you can leverage your leaders and line managers to create after shows with their respective teams to go a little bit deeper and dive more into the topic. And speaking of, I'm going to do an after show for us for this webinar a week from today at the same exact time. And I believe we'll put a link in the chat and we'll send it in the follow-up materials and in the email. So if you don't catch the link right now, know that we'll send it again, where you can see an after show in action and again, go deeper and maybe get more of your questions answered, etc. So another way to personalize instead of one size fits all is to land the plane. And what do I mean by that? There's a lot of rituals that we follow when the plane that we're on is about to land, right? We put our tray table up and we put our seat forward and we put our seatbelt back on. And my suggestion is that we need to do the same kind of rituals for our all hands. So basically bring the all hands safely home. What this really means is to take some time to clarify takeaways or next steps or calls to action, summarize key points and takeaways, or ask others for their takeaways. It's a great way to gather data as to what's landing. The reason that this is so important is it spends a couple of minutes not just sharing information, but integrating that information. And we can't assume people will remember. We really can't. This is why repetition is so important. And so this small act, again, maybe it's 2 minutes, can help ensure that your all hands are not just a one-off. And again, it has a better chance of this content really sticking for the long term. So I'm about to hand it back to Devin, but before I do, just want to touch quickly on pre-coms, since this is a workshop specialty. And excuse me, one way to personalize your pre-coms is to think about not just focusing on the message. So I think a lot of typical pre-coms for all hands look like this. They say it's going to start at 4:00 and here's what we're going to hear from, here's the topic, and see you there. And if I get an email like that, I may say, do I really need to be there? Can you just send me the slides? And the answer probably is yes. There's less of a reason for me to show up personally. I'm not sure why I'm needed there. It doesn't feel personal to me. And so instead, my suggestion is to communicate not just the message, but also the moment. This is a sample message. So tomorrow's our town hall. We're excited to see you all there. We want you there because your feedback and contributions tell us what resonates, what's special about this moment. Is this the first time we're sharing our financials or what it means for us? Thanks for clearing your schedules. It means a lot to me. This is a much more personal invite, I'd argue. And again, this probably takes an extra minute or two to write it like this. This is not a huge lift, I'd argue. And I think it can have a really significant difference. Again, the whole thesis here is we want to create our all hands, or really our gatherings or change programs in general, with people, not at them, and about them, not about anyone. And when we do that, we're much more likely to have them be not just more effective, but much more engaging. So I'm going to leave you with this question. And I want to acknowledge something that might be true for many of you here today, which is that obviously you care. You're here because you see the potential of these all hands, but maybe leadership doesn't get it. Maybe you're like, yeah, Lindsay, duh, this is great. But what about my CEO? What about everybody else? And I think sometimes the problem is that other folks, your leadership team perhaps, thinks that the all hands is for them to showcase their ideas, their updates, to check their box. And when that's their mindset at the top, it can feel like you're pushing a boulder uphill. Like I've completely been there. And we know the meeting can be better and more human and more engaging, but maybe you're not the one holding the microphone. So if this is you, the shift I want to offer is you don't have to control the entire all hands, right? You can influence how it lands in small ways, like how you frame an invite, or what questions you ask, or suggest a speaker open with, or how you recap takeaways afterwards. You can start by asking, I think, what is a very powerful question internally: who is this all hands for? And if the answer is the leadership team, gently challenge that and remind them that we're not just delivering content, we're trying to create clarity and connection and commitment. And that means designing it with the audience and the employees in mind, not just the presenter. So I'd like to land the plane for us, for ourselves, and hopefully practice what I preach. We opened by talking about how all hands are opportunities to influence and not just inform. And hopefully today I gave you some ideas on how to do that. Whether you, again, are the one really leading the all hands or influencing how they're done, hopefully one gives you the keys to drive and the other gives you language maybe to persuade. And so I would love to know in the chat, what's your one takeaway or what's your biggest opportunity right now? Take just a couple of seconds to understand what's landing for this group. 3. I like that people are using numbers. That's very helpful. Awesome. You can use sentences too. Start with the effect, after shows. Cool.
Framing
Great.
the agenda as questions I saw come through.
This is great. I love how diverse these answers are as well. Fantastic. Okay, wonderful. Last thing I'll say, if this session sparks some ideas for you, I'd love to keep the conversation going. You can connect with me on LinkedIn or visit my website. There's some QR codes to do that. And I partner with companies on everything from rethinking all hands to designing offsites or leadership programs or onboarding moments that, again, really move people. And in addition to project work, I also speak and lead workshops on how to influence at scale inside organizations, inside teams, and through the kind of live moments that we talked about today. And so today was just a sample. If you'd like to bring these ideas into your organization or explore how to do this within your company, I'd love to hear what you're working on, and please reach out. And lastly, just a reminder that we're doing an after show next Wednesday after Memorial Day, the same time. And I hope to see you there. And so with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to hand it back and over to Devin for more great ideas.
Awesome. I'm going to do the tail old. Can everybody see the screen?
Looks great, Devin.
All right. Thank you so much, Lindsay. I think that was such a great sort of kickoff to what I'm going to talk about, which is the more like practical day-to-day steps and really a look at what my process is. I'm really curious to see and hear what you all do before all hands, during all hands, and post all hands. But let's dive right in. So all hands for us at Workshop doesn't start the day of the meeting. It's well before. And so as I said, here's a look into my prep to make sure that this meeting is as engaging and effective as it possibly can be. So the first step of that is actually a recurring meeting with our CEO, Rick, and our employee engagement manager, Brooke. Now, these are two pretty unique people in the company because they have different perspectives of all hands, right? Rick is really looking at that top down, like what are our goals? How are we tracking as a company? And what are the ways that we can build a narrative to inform folks that are working here, right? Whether you're on the marketing team or the people ops team or sales or product. And then Brooke, she is going to be thinking about how do we make this enjoyable? How do we make it fun? I love seeing in the chat those examples of folks who use music to cue up all hands. We do the same thing here at Workshop. And so our meeting with this recurring meeting that is happens every Wednesday, which is the day after our all hands, which is on Tuesday. You might have heard me mention this already, but we have all hands every week. I would love to hear in the chat, how often are you all having all hands? That's something I'm really curious about, just to see based on like company size, if you're distributed, if you're all in the office, so on and so forth. All right. So once we have an outline of the meeting, so we've talked to Rick, we've talked to Brooke, we have an understanding of how we're going to make this engaging, but we're also going to be really effective and action-oriented with the content. I'll then share a slide outline and an agenda in a designated Slack channel for our all hands. And this could be in Teams too, right? If you're a Microsoft Office, you can do this in Teams. Basically, then from Wednesday to the following Monday, we let people update the deck as needed. Now, the way that this is able to happen like in real time is we use Pitch. When I first started at Workshop, I had never heard of Pitch before, but now I'm like brand ambassador for Pitch. It's so good. It allows you to edit things in real time. It's very collaborative. You can see people's cursors moving across the screen. In fact, it's what we actually use for this webinar today. So if there was like a typo, for example, on one of these slides, there's not. Kelsey could easily jump in, or Mayella could easily jump in and make that change in real time. I love that. It's really cool. And then it also allows us to distribute those slides easily with just a link. So that's one of the ways that we are allowing people to update things basically from that Wednesday to the following Monday. And the benefit of using an online editor is the ability for folks to collaborate across the company. Now, we have a deadline, but it's going to be pretty flexible, right? Like sometimes we'll hit that Monday at 10 a.m. deadline for content being in the pitch deck, but sometimes we don't. We know that business is dynamic. Sometimes things happen after that deadline, but feel really important to include in your all hands deck. So I block about an hour of time. So our all hands is at 10 a.m. Central. So basically from 9 to 9:55, I'm running through the deck, making sure that everything's in, looking for opportunities to improve design, making sure that font sizes are accessible. I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but also making sure that there's that strong narrative that Rick talked about when we were planning the meeting, right? If the goal is to talk about a specific product feature, is that really clear from a perspective of from the product team? Does the marketing team have a say in this? How can people engage and really understand what we're talking about? And again, the goal for all hands isn't just this information dump, right? It's a cohesive and goal forward time to align with all of your employees. And so because our team is distributed, so HQ for Workshop is in Omaha, but that's not where everybody works from. We host all hands on Zoom. So what the room looks like, this photo on the screen here is a good look into our cube space. There might be some more photos on our website, but we have the space that's called the cube. It's like our multi-purpose room, excuse me. And we have two big screens that everyone can look at who's actually in the space. For folks who are joining online, one of those screens is just the slides, and then the other screen is all of the participants in the chat. I'll have a better photo of this in just a moment. But our space actually just had some updates to make the in real life experience a little bit better. So now we have ambient sound and microphones. So that way, folks who are speaking about specific slides can not only be heard in the room, but heard clearly online. So it's just those little micro adjustments, time over time, working with Brooke to really make sure that the experience is inclusive, accessible for everyone, regardless of where they're joining from. All right, so that's pretty much that's a high simplification. It's a lot of work that goes into before all hands, right? It's a lot of content to gather and round up, but y'all know that, you understand it. So let's talk about what actually happens on the day of all hands. So, one of the questions that I like to think about when not only gathering and rounding up content and editing content for all hands, but on that day of it's how are we making this memorable and action oriented, right? We don't want to have too much of one thing and not enough of the other. And that's why, again, working really closely with our CEO as well as our employee engagement manager is like the perfect combination of people to bring this lens. And the good news is there's a formula or a science to accomplish this week over week. One of my favorite ways to shake things up is having multiple speakers. So I saw someone in the chat say they went from like internal comms to being someone who talks a lot. That's my story here at Workshop too. I pretty often speak during all hands and not just for like internal comms updates. Maybe I'll kick off the meeting. Maybe I'll work with the marketing team to run through a highlight. But on average, we like to have at least 6 different speakers. I will say in full transparency, that didn't happen for us yesterday at all hands. We actually had a pretty short all hands. It ran about 40 minutes versus our full hour. And Rick, our CEO, did most of the talking, but it was a pretty light week. We're also like right ahead of a holiday weekend. It's just light content. And one of the things I also like to highlight here is that our speakers are both online and in person to incorporate all voices from the company, regardless of their working location. We would hate to not include the perspective of someone just because they so happen to live in Texas or Utah. Another way to make sure that your all hands feels memorable is highlighting your employees. So at Workshop, we call these our W's. And this is really just an opportunity to celebrate employee accomplishments, whether they're big or small. And you can categorize and quantify big or small, however that makes the most sense for you. But I think we can all relate to what it feels like to be celebrated by your company or your leadership team. Now, one of the things I want to note here is gathering feedback on how your employees like to be acknowledged. Not everybody loves the big parade and their face on the slide. So, an easy way to gather this information and know this about the people that work there is doing like a quick pulse survey. This can actually be something that you embed in your all hands email, or it can be done during onboarding. Here's some more pictures. I forgot this one has little transitions here, but these are just some examples of the things that we highlight for our W section at All Hands. But yeah, and this is real. Chase really did get a promotion. All right. So I mentioned this before, but our team, like many others, is distributed. So we need to make sure that All Hands is not just for the employees who work in the office, but for those who are joining us online. So I'd mentioned this earlier, but here's a photo from one of our remote employees who shared what All Hands looks like from their POV. So they have a laptop and then they have an external monitor. And so very much like our experience in the cube, they're looking at the slides on one side and then the participants on the other. Now I'm just going to go ahead and acknowledge the elephant in the room. All of the cameras are not on, and it's not really like an expectation. But one of the things I will say that is really active during our all hands is our chat. So regardless of the person's camera is on or off, we know that folks are engaging. We know that they're listening to things and responding in real time. One of the cool things that we also do is have that chat displayed in the cube. So the folks who are watching in person can also see what's being discussed online. It's a really cool dynamic to see play out live. So you may be wondering, like, okay, you're the internal comms manager. You've done all the pre-work. You're doing some of the work during all hands. But what do you do when you have this moment of downtime? So I'm a part of planning and I know everything that's going to be said at all hands, right? Like I have access to the deck, but I still challenge myself to sit in the audience and listen as if I'm hearing everything for the first time. This is because I can take really good notes this way. I saw someone in the chat say that note taking is how they pay attention. I'm the exact same way. And experiencing all hands, just like my colleagues, allows me to identify like questions. Were there like moments of pause, or was it like clunky or awkward in any specific way? Is there an area of opportunity to adjust slides or the sizing of something? Whatever the case may be, I'm listening both as a participant, but also a person who wants to make sure that this is even better next week, or we're keeping a high quality bar. So if you're not already participating in all hands as like in the participant seat, I would highly recommend this if you're not having to manually run through slides. Okay, so all hands is ended, and now it's time to thoughtfully recap what you just heard. Those notes are going to come in handy for this. So one of the ways that I do this is keeping the process really simple and quick. So all hands is weekly for us, so I need to make sure that I'm being efficient and effective. I don't want all hands to be a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday endeavor when I could try to condense that as much as possible. So on the screen here is a quick capture of our all hands recap emails. We have a lot of other content that is about making really beautiful and dynamic emails, but this one is pretty straight to the point. It covers our highlights. It talks about growth, product, whatever other specific updates there were. And it's pretty text heavy, but it's broken out in sections. So it's really easy for employees to see and scan as they need. As we mentioned, we use Zoom to do all of our recordings and to make sure that our employees are like getting the most important information and not the pre-meeting chatter or the playlist that's going on. I spend just a little bit of time snipping that recording. This is something that you can do on the back end of Zoom under the recording section. And in this screenshot, you can see me like, look how much time we spend yapping. So that blue section is the actual content of all hands. Everything else is just chatter. So that doesn't need to be distributed to the rest of the team. Within Workshop, we actually have this really cool feature. It's called campaigns, and this allows you to organize emails around specific topics or initiatives, helping you track their effectiveness over time. We'll talk about measuring in just a little bit. But within the all hands campaign, I can easily clone an email, copying the previous week's content, format, everything. It just copies it right over. And this allows me very quickly to drop in new content. And when I say drop, I literally mean drop. So that's pulling over an image right from my desktop. That's copying and pasting some of the content from my notes, whatever the case may be. It allows me to move really quick. And then I would love to see in the chat, because I want to be affirmed in this way. Does anyone else just love a second set of eyes? Like, I write for a living. I consider myself to be a writer, but I'm not pressing send before somebody else looks at it, at least one person. And for me, Brooke is that person. It's funny. She's actually out of the office right now. I'm like, who's gonna look at this? But Brooke, because again, she knew the content from the very, very start, is a great second set of eyes for me to look for things like typos, making sure that the links work, making sure that the flow of the email is good, making sure that it's not too long, those sort of things. Love having that second set of eyes. Sometimes 3 if I really need it. And so a win for me is of sending a recap of all hands the same day. This doesn't always happen, but I try to get that actionable content into the hands of employees right away. To help with distribution of our email, I also push to our general Slack channel, and it's really fun to see the responses and engagement there too. It's really just a continuation of what happened live. And one of the things that you'll see is our subject lines. So our subject lines are always these funny little one-liners from our meetings. And this is another reason why it's important for me to listen and be present during all hands versus being like on the administrative side, because I can sit in the crowd and hear those like funny little jokes and things like that. We just have a really funny company. We had a new hire class start yesterday. I was like, I don't know if it's a requirement to just be funny, but we have lots of jokes around here. And so I talked a little bit earlier about campaigns and your ability to track those results of how your all hands emails are performing. And this is just a quick look at our actual campaign results, right? So you can see the amount of times it has gone out, our open rate, which is sitting at 87%. I believe I did this screen capture last week, so I don't think it's changed too much. You can see our click rate, all these things. It will show you in real time, and it really allows you to understand what's working and what's not. And lastly, if you're in need of an internal comms tool, we can help. Workshop was literally built with internal communications in mind. So I would encourage you to check out our website to learn more. We're going to drop some links in the chat. But now I certainly want to transition over to questions. I wanted to leave enough time for this today. So I'm going to pause there and get into questions.
Oh my goodness. Devin, Lindsay, thank you both so much. We have so many good questions to go through. So I'm really excited to dive into that. So to kick us off, though, I think this is a common question, but what happens if no one asks questions during your all company meetings?
I can take that one. I hear that a lot, actually. I think there's a couple of reasons for this. So instead of saying, here's my solution, I would actually first maybe diagnose what the problem actually is, like a true psychologist that I am. So I think a couple of reasons for this. One is we don't give people enough time to say, what questions do you have? And then we don't like the silence. And so we quickly move to the next portion. And people need some time to think, especially more introverted folks. So there are ways that we can prompt folks to make a longer runway for them. We can give them, again, the effect agenda in advance so they know what questions might be percolating. We can say, here are some great questions that we got last time to get them thinking. If we're in person or maybe it's a smaller company, maybe we even go into breakout rooms and give people the chance to talk about the content with others so they can surface questions. And the last thing I'll say is maybe the way that we're framing it is an issue. So if we say, any questions? It sounds a lot different than if we say, what questions do you have? One is a much more open way to surface people's needs and questions. So those are a few, probably a lot more to say on that topic, but that's a start.
Yeah, I love that. Devin, anything to add there?
I know. I was just typing in the chat. I was like, agree. One of the things that we do, and I saw this mentioned in the chat, is when I'm working with Brooke and Rick on the content of All Hands, we're pre-thinking about what those questions might be. So we do place some questions to get the conversation going. And we also, like Lindsay said, it's that pause, right? It's that uncomfortable moment where you can hear a pin drop, but we really want to give a time for it within our all hands. So we try to not speed through things and just like this, like really be cognizant of time to make sure that we're not reducing questions to 2 minutes, right? Because people are looking at their clocks just like you are. And so if they're like, man, I have a question, but it's probably going to take 3 minutes and we only have two on the time, we don't want people to have to do the mental gymnastics of trying to make sure there's time for their question.
And again, people will speak up in the group where they feel the safest. So it might be a good reason again for an after show for folks, especially if it's a heavy or difficult or challenging topic.
Love that. This question says, curious how you gather the wins. Does leadership choose people to highlight? Is it peer-to-peer nomination? One thing I struggle with at a big company is not knowing what I don't know.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, in our all hands Slack channel, we have representation from every department. And so, on that Wednesday, thank you. I love this hat. On that Wednesday, I will just put a message that's like at everyone wins roundup. And this allows different department heads to elevate some idea or elevate some wins that happened on their team that week. Because I certainly don't know what engineers are doing, right? And so it is a very reliant relationship where I do need those leaders to speak up. But one of the things that I also do is watch other Slack channels. We're a very Slack heavy company where we use it for all business functions day to day. So I'm looking like I saw this person do a shout out in our customer channel, or I saw this here, and then I'll bring those over. So it's a both and. It's relying on leadership to elevate their employees, but then also being aware of those moments yourself.
Awesome. Lindsay, this question is for you. Someone asked, I love the idea of after shows. What's your philosophy on pre-read materials?
Ooh, that's a great question. I'm cool with them. I actually think that they're fine, but I often find that they don't get referenced or used. So we ask people to do a pre-read and then we don't mention it or we don't like circle back to it. And then it can feel like our time is wasted. So I would do a pre-read thoughtfully if needed and do two things. One, tell people why you're sending a pre-read. So make your thinking very visible. Explain the why. Adults want to know the why. And then maybe to start your all hands, maybe surface some reflections about what people took away from the pre-read. So again, it ties it together in a way where people feel their time and effort is respected.
I love that. That's a good one. Okay, this is probably for both of you, but can landing the plane happen after the meeting through written comms?
You want to go first, Evan?
So I think depending on, I was going to say the weight of the content, right? Like, I think there's certainly value in making it clear, like, here's the definitive stop. But I do think that there's times when it's like, this was an update that requires additional things after, right? So I don't want folks to feel boxed in of everything has to be tied up with a bow at the end of all hands. But I think it does give closure and allow folks to leave that meeting, like you were talking about, Lindsay, feeling like, okay, I understand what I'm supposed to take away from this. So that's why I'm hesitant to say one or the other. I think it depends. So put an asterisk to that answer.
Yeah.
I think it depends. And I would say both and. So yes, in your post-coms, but also when we used to be in person, many of us, we landed the plane in hallways or in the elevator after talking about what it meant to us or debriefing it. And if we don't have that opportunity again, it's much easier for it to go in one ear, not the other. So I think it's really good to just maybe have a closing slide and don't assume people will do that on their own. Or if you want them to do that on their own, tell them and then also tell them why. So just keep really explicit.
Yeah, I love that. I love this next question and curious to hear both of your thoughts. How do you think about the size of the all hands influences their format, style, function, right? So how does an all hands look different from a 50-person company to a 1,000+ company? And how does that kind of affect the style, format? How does that influence?
I can certainly speak from the right now at Workshop. I think we're at 82 employees. And so we're in that like mid-size, depending on what framework you're using to measure companies. But for us, I think we have an hour that's slated out. But really, the weight of it is distributed among how many speakers that we have, right? So really aiming to have one representative, from each department week over week. So that way it's not just like a whole meeting that's only talking about like growth or a whole meeting that's only talking about product. And we're a tech company, so that can get very specific. So depending on like your company and the content that needs to be deployed, I think that'll make the difference of the length, the amount of time that you're spending on each section, right? Like we pretty evenly dice up the sections. Each is about 15 minutes. So that is another way to look at it. But I would love to hear what Lindsay has to say about that too.
Yeah, three quick things. So, one, I think the tips I'm sharing with you, I hope are agnostic to company size, team size, whether it's a department all hands or company all hands, etc. I think we can do all these things. I would say it depends on the effect, the desired effect of your all hands. So, not to sound like a broken record, but if we don't know what it's there to do, it's a lot harder to understand things like cadence or format or speakers or timing. So, really, it goes back to the beginning of what is the before and after? What happens at the very end? What do we want people to take away? Clarifying that makes everything else easier. And then the last thing I'll say is I often get this question, and this is similar of what do we put in our department all hands versus our company all hands, and should they be different? I think the most important thing is if it's not relevant to all employees, it should not go in your all company all hands. Take that as you will.
AI, hot topic. We hear it a lot. We had Ginger asked, curious to learn how AI may play a role in all hands. If people are using it for all hands, how? Devin or Lindsay, any kind of tips there or experience with using AI for all hands?
Yeah, I think people fall in one of two camps when it comes to AI. They're either like, yeah, I love it, or would rather not. I'm in the love it side of things. And I use AI to help write content in that recap email. So, like I said, I wish I could share my screen again, but I would be too embarrassed of the notes. But I take crazy notes during all hands. I'm literally just typing away. There's no formatting, there's no structure. But I actually use a GPT profile that we have set up to help make sense of those notes and then format it that is like a one-to-one match of what our emails is. Hopefully that's not sounding way too technical, but like the skinny of it is I use AI to make sense of my all hands notes for recap emails. We're not using AI right now to help with like content generation or kind of the agenda or anything like that, because again, that comes from my meeting with Rick and Brooke, but certainly for streamlining what we heard and making it really clear and actionable for employees post comms.
Love that. Anything to add there, Lindsay? Cool. Peggy asked, I'm super keen to know how to measure the impact of the all hands meeting to be able to communicate the value of these meetings to employees and leadership. Any tips on measuring the impact of these meetings?
Yes, I'm going to be such a broken record. And if we don't know what our desired effect is, we don't know what we're there to measure, right? And so what I tend to see is we measure reactions instead of results. This is common across many things, not just all hands. It's a bane of the L&D person's existence, learning and development person's existence. So again, what are we there to do? And then that helps us understand what we need to measure. So for example, with one company I worked with, it was whether or not people understood and were bought into leadership's strategy, right?
Mhm.
Or it could be whether or not people thought this was a good use of their time. Or it could be they feel more aligned around the mission. I think these are really feeling questions and qualitative questions. It could be also on a scale of 1 to 10, how well do you understand our strategy for the next year? So it really depends on what you're trying to make these all hands achieve. And I think that's really the answer I would give.
Love that. This one has come up a few times too with like larger organizations, but when you have 1,000 plus attendees and maybe a hybrid or a remote first culture, how do you integrate engagement when it's a one-way live stream via Google or Zoom? Anything, any kind of practical tips on making it more engaging for maybe remote folks?
Yeah, that's not our situation on a one-to-one, but I will say the chat function is really where you can have a lot of engagement, right? Even the use of like emojis. And I think one of the things that we do really too is acknowledging the chat in real time. Even as I'm like talking to y'all right now, like I'm looking and responding to make, because this is the same thing, right? Like I can't see you all or your responses, but I can see the chat, and making that a part of your all hands. And if you need to carve out time for that, right? Even if it's okay, right now we're running 15-minute sections, let's scale that back to 13 to allow for like ad libbing and responding to things in real time. Because I think part of the asking questions or just feeling engaged is not having to hold everything till the end. We've even seen on this webinar, like sometimes people have to sneak off early to a call or they might forget what they had to say. So if you're able to, as much as you can, respond in real time to the chat, I think that's going to help a lot with making people not only feel seen, but engaged as well.
Yeah, I love that.
Devin said the magic words, right? Helping people feel seen. So if it really is a live stream where people are really passively just watching, I would add a couple of tips, which is one, to have an opening slide that gives people a question to ask themselves. I said this already, but here's our content of the day. What does this make you think of? Or what's happening for you in your organization, just for them to think on their own, right? And they don't have to, you can give them a choice, which is one way to give people a role, but just get them thinking about the content in their own context. So I would lean on the poll, how to give people a role and a sense of ownership in the all hands, whether it's 30,000 people or 30 or being live streamed. And again, I hope you don't need to change your content to do this. It's more of the how than the what.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And also, Jeslyn in the chat said for Google Workspace, live stream viewers can engage using emoji reactions, the Q&A feature, polls when enabled. So a lot of good tips there. Another question we have here are what are some suggestions for making sure junior level employees feel like they can participate in all hands? So it's not just senior executives talking heads. How do we make sure we make people feel seen, that they can participate in all hands?
Yeah, I talked a little bit about this in my slides on we aim to have 6 different voices heard throughout all hands. One of the things that I didn't say is it's 6 leadership members or 6 department heads, right? So one of the really cool things is, yes, we have a product update, but that doesn't mean that the head of product has to do it. Why not hear actually from the engineer who wrote that line of code? Or why not hear from the sales rep who did this very specific thing? I think hearing one from your colleagues allows you to have more practical use cases because sometimes like that leadership is going to provide, here's the strategy and here's how we execute it, where the person who's doing the things can get really granular. And then again, that also just invites new voices to the conversation, which helps keep things really live and active. In fact, Maella, she's been tapped at our company to start helping with a particular section of all hands. I'm not going to give it away because I know folks are watching, but she's someone who has a really specific energy that she brings. So even just having different voices for different parts is helpful.
Awesome. Lindsay?
Real quick, yes to everything Devin said, and 2 other things to add. One is sharing wins, for example, that Devin is doing with Workshop. You can ask folks if they want to tell the story of the win of someone else or nominate that person or speak up, because much more than the what they did, it's the how and why that matters. So if we can tell stories, it elicits more of clarity on the behavior that we want in our organization. And then secondly, it doesn't just have to be involving them in speaking. They can also be stand-ins for the kind of change that maybe you're seeking. Maybe they're pilot group members of a new change initiative, and you highlight them as folks that people can go to ask questions. So they don't have to speak necessarily. They can be highlighted in other ways.
Love that. Thank you to everybody who has joined us today. We're at time. We will send out again a follow-up with the recording, the slides, how to connect with Lindsay, how to connect with Devin. We'll send the chat. I know there were so many great conversations happening in there, a lot of LinkedIn so you can connect with people. And we hope to see you next time. So Lindsay, Devin, a huge thank you to the both of you as well. And I hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you all for joining me.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Bye, friends. Thank you.
Bye.